everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Education Series produced by the Australian Fitness Academy. It's like progressive overload for your brain. I'm your host, Tom Rock, and today's episode we're going to talk about the application of periodization. And thank you to Annabelle for sending your email through. Annabelle's asked some great questions, so I'm really excited for this episode. Annabelle has just completed our advanced periodization technique course, which is one of our short courses here at the Australian Fitness Academy. So if you like the sound of this podcast and you haven't done any extra study on periodization and it's interesting to you, you can sign up for that. It's an online course, so you can sign up for that too. Email info@afa.com.au and they'll be able to help you out with all that in terms of accessing our short course on advanced periodization. But yeah, Annabelle sent through these questions and she's just gone through the course, and they're great questions on periodization because it is a topic that, while there's definitely underlying principles of periodization and there's different theories, and we will teach you how to apply it and how it has been applied and what to do. There's so many different options in how to apply it, and when it comes to what you're applying it to, that's going to make a difference. Who you're applying it to is going to make a difference. What you're applying it for is going to make a difference to how you periodize and put it into a program. So great questions from Annabelle. I'm glad you sent these through, and hopefully, I get you some answers out of this podcast. So periodization, I haven't covered this in a long time on the podcast. I think I did it almost 2 years ago. I'll put the link to my first episode on periodization in the description. That basically just gave an overview, I guess, of the theory of periodization and what it is and why you might use periodization. Hopefully this one goes a little bit more in depth into some of the factors within periodization. But Annabelle's question sort of will take us through that in a pretty good way. So our first question, and periodization is all about, I guess, it depends what you apply it to, but usually peaking at the right time for an athlete perspective is making sure our peak performance is at the right time, or we maximize performance for a competition or a tournament or a performance, whatever it is. But it doesn't always have to relate to athlete performance at all. So it can be with goals in the gym, anything. But Annabelle's first question is, can you work different components to peak while other components deload during that time? So our example is if I do say a block of programming on back squats, and I'm do a block of trying to peak my back squats, while my bench press, I do sort of more of a deload for my bench press. While I'm trying to maximize my squat, I can deload my bench press. And is that going to give me adequate recovery still? And that's a really good question. So periodization, when we look at it, we'll talk about daily undulating and block periodization as we go through, but say the idea about periodization is we sort of maximize performance and we allow ourselves deload to make sure we're recovering and not overtraining. So we need to have these not rest weeks, but deload weeks factored in, and it's generally in there to sort of reduce the chance of overtraining and potentially just provide some structure. And then there's lots of theories out there whether deloads are necessary. Do I need to have them in my training? And lots of discussion needs to go into that depending on different circumstances. But this is a great question because we're going to find at different times, even with athletes or general population, one sort of fitness component may be more important than the other. So in this example, I'm trying to peak my back squat, and I'm just not as focused on my bench press anymore potentially. So can I do that, and will that allow me to sort of adequately recover? And I think definitely yes, that's absolutely an option, I think, Annabelle, and it's a really good way to think about periodization. The more periodization works at a sort of a macro level, so we can look at total training volume potentially, and am I making sure I'm getting enough rest, or putting in deload weeks, or how am I responding to training? Am I progressively overloading? So am I getting stronger or faster or whatever it is? But this idea, and it's a really good one, and why periodization, or a really good way to apply periodization, is to say, for this period of time, I'm going to work on my back squat. I don't really mind what happens to my bench press. Obviously, I potentially want to maintain my bench press or minimize my strength loss in bench press, but my main focus is my squat. And periodization is going to allow us to do this. So let's say, and it's good to come up with a bit of an example, let's say I train 3 days per week. And I just train 3 days a week. Let's go full body, potentially. But it means you can go. Let's say I was doing squat and bench press, and deadlift. So I just pick one movement once per week or something like that. But it means you can go, okay, for this period of 4 or 8 or 12 weeks, I'm going to squat twice per week, and then I'm going to bench press and deadlift on that other day, on the same day. And this is just a random example. It doesn't necessarily have to make sense. So you can go for that period of time. My squat is going to be my focus. I'm going to have 2 days on squat, 1 day on bench and dead. And that could be that period of time. And your main goal is to see that squat strength go up, and hopefully your bench press and deadlift stay roughly the same. And then your next block, you might go, okay, now my squat, I've got to this level. I'm going to try and maintain my squat by squatting once per week. And I'm going to go, maybe I want to focus back on my bench press. So now I'm going to bench press twice per week and squat once per week. And I think then you want to think about your deloads around that. So it's sort of, try think of that as separately. So you can periodize your focus of training, and then you want to periodize your total training volume potentially, and you'll still go through that block or mesocycle structure or the weekly structure, where we might have a sort of the 3-1 loading paradigm, where we go step up 3 weeks in volume, and then we have a bit of a deload week. So every 4th week is that deload week. You can still do that, and it doesn't really change how you apply that. You've just focused those 2 sessions on squat and that 1 on bench. So, and that's a really good example of how you might do it. That can work also if we look at components of fitness. You could do the same thing with, say, strength and hypertrophy. So block periodization, and that's where I love periodization, because it's so flexible in how we apply it, and you can do it however you want. Find out what works for you. Run different programs, write yourself different programs. It might be different depending on clients' goals, but I could do a block of hypertrophy, and I just do, if let's say 3 times a week again, I just train every single day is hypertrophy day, and that's my main focus, is optimizing muscle growth through this phase. That's one way to do it. If I sort of know that I want to do hypertrophy and strength, I could maybe have hypertrophy on 2 days and more of a strength focus on the other day. So I've got 2 days of hypertrophy, 1 day strength. And then if all of a sudden I go, for this next block, my main focus is strength, and I just want to sort of maintain my hypertrophy. I don't want to sort of drop off. I want to keep getting some stimulus there and maintain my muscle mass, but I'm more focused on strength. For this next block, I'm going to put in 2 strength days and 1 hypertrophy day. So you can sort of manage your training and your specific goals around the different blocks, and I think that's a really great way to do it. So yeah, definitely still manage your deloads within that, but look at that daily focus. I think if you're trying to sort of maximize different components, absolutely doable, and it can be a good way to do it. Even managing resistance training and cardio training. Sometimes you might have a resistance training focus, and you might train 3 or 4 days per week in the gym and only run sort of 1 or 2 days. But then you might switch, and if you're, say, training for a triathlon or something, as that sport gets closer, and you go, okay, now I want to focus on cardiovascular fitness, you might go, okay, I'm going to do 2 full body sessions in the gym, and I'm going to run or do my cardio exercise 4 days a week. So we've sort of changed the idea for this block. We're going to do cardio, more cardio focus, and I'm not going to focus as much on maintaining my strength and hypertrophy. I've just sort of, or increasing it. I'm going to focus on maintaining. So 2 days a week will definitely help me maintain, while I focus more on my cardiovascular exercise. So it's a really good way to look at periodization, and what fitness component you want to develop predominantly. And it's really going to help with your planning. But you'll definitely still sort of need some deload weeks, and you sort of manage your training a little bit like that as well. But I'd say you just sort of manage what you're focusing in terms of potentially how many times you train it per week. But yeah, hopefully that helps with that and gives you a bit of a thought of how periodization can be applied as a whole depending on what factors we want to look at. The next question is about peak of performance or peak performance, and when does it occur? So we have different phases in periodization. We talk a lot about different phases and different mesocycles, and we have accumulation phases, recovery phases, and there's one phase called the realization phase or the realization mesocycle, and this can all depend on performance, and this is a little bit more athlete, I guess, based or peaking for an event or something like that, where we've sort of gone through blocks of training where one might be, let's say we might go from hypertrophy then to a strength block, and then we would have what we have is like our realization mesocycle where we sort of maximizing that strength and power, and generally this would be for a specific sport that might be strength or power orientated. If it's a cardiovascular endurance event, then this realization phase may look a little bit different. But what her question is the beginning or the end of the realization mesocycle when I would get my peak performance? And that's a great question, because you've sort of stated, like, wouldn't you be tired at the end of the 3 weeks? Because as you see with the periodization sort of chart, I guess, that third week, if we do the 3-1 paradigm and we got that fourth week as a deload, that third week is the highest intensity or the biggest workload out of the week. So wouldn't you be most fatigued then? And that is correct. So when we go for that realization mesocycle, let's say our goal is to be as strong as powerful as possible. We're basically trying to maximize that or train for that in that realization mesocycle. So we've gone from doing hypertrophy so we can build some muscle mass. Then we've gone to strength so we can sort of probably maximize those neural adaptations and maximize our force output. And then this realization, and look at this realization mesocycle as a chance to sort of really be specific and start to develop that explosive strength and power. So really your peak performance would probably be at the end of this phase, but you probably need, whether it's after that taper week, that deloadish week, or even another deload week after that, a bit of a taper, then you've sort of gone through that whole training process of building up, you've developed that explosive strength, and then you're sort of at your peak capacity. Hopefully at the end of that mesocycle, probably after that deload week, is when you'd expect peak performance. But there's a whole lot of different ways you can manage sort of a coming into season or into an event, and how you peak performance. But usually it would be at the end of that realization mesocycle. But yes, you're 100% correct. You'd want to be reduce the fatigue, take some time, whether it's a deload or a few days, to do maybe just a really low intensity or high intensity, low volume session, full recovery, and then you'd be there at peak performance, ready to go for whatever you want. So yeah, good question. And it's really about how you manage that deload and that recovery, so an athlete or a client feels fresh and ready to go, not sore or fatigued from the gym at all. And that can take sort of 3 to 4 days post sort of a light session. They should be feeling fresh, ready to go. If it's not a gym session they're going to, they should be ready for that event. They've sort of trained and they've maximized that final capacity to realize or the realization mesocycle to sort of, they've maximized that, in this case, strength and power sort of example. Hopefully that sort of ticks that one off. The next one is about daily undulating periodization. So it's, should we allow for recovery weeks or recovery weeks, during daily undulating periodization? Great question. So our advanced periodization technique course discusses a couple of different periodization models. One is the block periodization, where we basically work at different blocks. So I have a block of hypertrophy, whether it's 4, 8 weeks, however long I want to plan those blocks for. Block of hypertrophy into a block of strength into a block of power, for example. Daily undulating periodization is more around, I would work multiple, I'd work towards, I guess, multiple goals at the same time, and I'd change my focus during the week or within the week, or daily, as it sort of suggests, I guess. So my Monday might be my hypertrophy day. Thursday might be my max strength day. So I'm sort of working between components um, within the week. So I have two focuses at the same time, basically. And you just sort of keep trying to maximize those as you sort of work through your periodized model. Um, in terms of recovery weeks for the daily undulating periodization, yes, and it's a hard question to answer because it's going to depend on your programming, on your client, what they do outside of the gym, how their recovery is. But ideally, if we are starting to overload someone and look to that overreaching, usually that sort of higher level athlete or gym goer will be pushing fairly hard in all sessions. So no matter, even if it's like a hypertrophy compared to a max strength session, both sessions should be relatively fatiguing and tough to recover from. So you can still definitely look to do those loading paradigms where you sort of go 3 week build up into a 1 week deload, and you'd have your Mondays like a hypertrophy block, and your Thursdays or whatever day we're doing, as an example, is a strength day, would be a strength block, and you basically would write 2 blocks and run them concurrently with each other, um, and sort of try to maximize or maintain or maximize or increase both at the same time, and it can work well. Again, that's where you might get into that sort of scenario we had at the start, where you might do daily undulating but have a slightly more of a focus of hypertrophy or slightly more of a focus of strength, depending on what your current goal is, or you might do it all roughly at the same time, and that's okay. People have success running lots of different models of periodization, and daily undulating can be one of it. It can also keep, in terms of general population as well, it can keep it a little bit more interesting rather than coming in every week and doing sets of 10 or sets of 8 or sets of 12, whatever we're doing, and we're doing the same thing 2 or 3 times per week. It can mix it up. So one day I get to do sort of more hypertrophy focused, sets of 10, sets of 8, whatever it is. And then the other week, or the other day, I'm doing some more strength orientated or power orientated stuff. So I get a good mix and variety in there. So that can be a good benefit, I guess, of daily undulating periodization. But it can potentially get more confusing to program, and then recovery can be tougher to maximize with daily undulating periodization. I think what you want to, it depends how you structure it, I guess. If you look to you want to sort of, I guess, if you're doing deloads and things, you want to deload everything at the same time. If you reduce hypertrophy load but your strength's still high, that's sort of still going to be a tough stimulus. And then when your strength deloading, your hypertrophy's higher, that's going to be a stimulus. You can do that. You've just got to be careful that they don't match up both high at the same time, or even sort of both moderately. You get sort of stuck, and it can be fatiguing too. So it can get sort of overly complicated with daily undulating periodization depending on how you run it. But definitely don't need to overthink it. That's like deload weeks are great to plan in because it's scheduled recovery, and it reduces the chance that your client or the athlete is going to overtrain and cause you to have to sort of really minimize training load from to recover. So it's sort of there as a safeguard. But if a client is recovering well and they're progressing week to week, you might find they don't need as much of a deload, or they don't need deload. Some people don't deload at all, as long as that sort of they're managing their fatigue and their rest days within their program are really well structured. It can be fine. But yeah, I guess periodization is generally a lot of the literature and the research, or the practical application of it, is around athletes. So they're generally doing a lot of training, whether they're either in the gym or they're on the field doing cardiovascular training and skills and performance and things. So it's a lot crammed into one. So these weeks off from physical or lighter weeks in the gym or on the track are important to maximize recovery. For general population, if you're not doing as much cardio or you've got plenty of time to rest and your recovery is good, maybe you don't need it as much. But definitely allowing for that in your program can be good. It can be motivating for clients to know that if I work hard should work hard this week because next week's going to be a bit easier. It can be a good way to sort of educate them on their program, and it can help sort of maximize their output as well if they know they've got a bit of a lighter week coming up. But yeah, definitely lots of different ways we can sort of look to manage fatigue in daily undulating programs as well. But you can definitely do like, I'll deload my strength stuff, or I maximize my hypertrophy stuff, But yeah, you've just got to make sure you're sort of managing that fatigue overall. And then the, we'll look at sort of different loading paradigms. So the one, I guess the common one is 3-to-1. So you do 3 weeks sort of building up. And if you have a look at the advanced periodization, if you do have a look at this course and sign up to the course, you'll see it. It's in all the PowerPoints and the presentations. If you Google sort of block periodization, I'm sure you'll find sort of a loading paradigm. The 3-to-1 ratio is sort of, you sort of build up for 3 weeks and then have a deload, and then you build up again for 3 weeks, have a deload. And that's definitely probably the most common one, I guess, in terms of managing a mesocycle, 4-week mesocycle, and we just do those sort of 4-week blocks, and we can manage our training around that. And that's a great one to start with. I think there's nothing wrong with it. It's used over and over again, so a really fine one. Probably the other common one I would say is 2 weeks on, 1 week off. So you'd sort of build up for 2 weeks, have a slightly lighter week. Build up for 2 weeks, have a slightly lighter week. Up for 2 weeks, down for 1 week. So that's a 2-to-1, and that's probably, again, apply it however you want. There's lots of different ways to apply it, but I don't mind that one. It's sort of more of a in-season maintenance where we sort of want to have probably a few more sort of lighter weeks. We're trying to maintain, maximize our performance, but we don't need to sort of do these steep inclines of sort of really heavy 3rd week and then a deload. So the 2-to-1 can work really well in season, I believe. And still works well for the general population. It's just you sort of have the more frequent the deload for general population is probably not necessary, and we don't want to sort of emphasize every 3rd week is just a cruisy week, because usually they'll need to be pushing harder to reach their goals, general population. That's probably the one difference, I think, applying periodization to athletes, to some general pop. I shouldn't generalize at all, but a lot of athletes are very driven, especially with their training, and they're getting paid to perform, and especially if they're a younger athlete, they have to work really hard to get better, to perform, so they keep their contract or whatever. So generally they're more inclined to work too hard, or do too much work. So they'll be going out doing extra kilometers, extra gym, and you're in there trying to manage them and tell them to rest and recover. So that's where the rest or the lower workload weeks are really important to put in, because they're going to be pushing themselves anyway. So the more we can bring that back sometimes to maximize recovery is important. With the general pop, sometimes it's the other way around. So sometimes it's us trying to motivate them, and we've really got to push them to push hard in the gym or push hard during their sessions and really exert themselves, not completely, but close to failure, or make sure they're working to the right intensity that we know is going to stimulate adaptations and get them results. And having too many, I guess, deload weeks, I think if they 2-to-1 means every 3rd week is a deload. So if they work hard for 1 week and then the next week they're not feeling well, or they just sort of take it a bit slack, then they've already got a deload. So they're going to end up having sort of 2 deloads and 1 on, 1 off. So it sort of gets a bit messy. So I think general population, you can almost get away with sometimes without deloads, depending on their program and their structure. So as long as you're programming well, you might not have to think about deloads too much. But yeah, definitely 2-to-1 is another popular sort of paradigm that might be out there. You might want to try yourself potentially, that can sort of keep you engaged in the gym. But yeah, most of the time it's sort of a 2-to-1. And that could be a 4-week mesocycle, or it could even be a 6-week mesocycle. So you might go 2-1, 2-1, 2-1, and that's like a 6-week block of maintenance, or a 6-week block of training as well. So lots of different ways you can structure it. Like mesocycles don't have to be 4 weeks; they can be 6 weeks as well. There's lots of different flexibility around that. So that's a really cool thing to play around with as well. I just don't think you want to over program deload weeks potentially. Good to have, because it's going to give a client a goal and they know they can work hard and get a bit of a cruisier week. But you want to make sure a client is still sort of progressing in those other weeks, depending on their focus. And plans are great. And I think it's great to plan, but don't be afraid to change things on the fly. If a client comes in and it's a deload week, but they're feeling really good and they want to sort of perform, and it's not close to season, they don't have anything coming up, and it's just like, oh, there's a general population client, they're feeling good and they want to work hard, let them work hard, and you can always give them a deload week the week after, or when they come in one week and they're like, oh, I didn't sleep well, I've sort of a bit run down, work stressful. That can be a good time. Like, that's fine. Let's have a bit of a lighter week this week, and then let them recover and get the other stresses in their life on top of that, and then they can come in and maximize it. So deloads, while they're good to plan, sometimes general pop deloads can help facilitate the stuff that's going to affect their recovery and their performance outside of the gym. So that's a really cool way to look at it as well, I think. The last question was not much in relation to periodization, but still a really good question. It was talking about strength and muscle mass. And it's a really interesting one that does come up a lot. So it is a good question. And she related it to gymnasts. So gymnasts, she's just sort of said, gymnasts are really strong, which absolutely they're very strong, but they're small, like smaller than we look at if we look at hypertrophy or bodybuilders with potentially a lot more muscle mass. So she's just saying if we take into sort of example or cross-sectional area of muscles, and again, she's said, bigger muscles are stronger muscles, so 100% correct. And that's sort of the way it goes. If we've got more muscle mass, we should be able to apply more force, and we're going to be stronger. And that is generally correct. I think it's sometimes hard to quantify, especially when we're watching people on TV or seeing photos on Instagram or online. Muscle size can be hard to differentiate unless one person is standing next to another person. And there's also the other factor of power to weight ratio. So while gymnasts may be smaller, their muscle mass for their size, you could say, is quite large, or they don't hold a lot of, or they generally don't have a lot of body fat on them. So their power to weight ratio, they're generally very powerful and explosive. Whereas bodybuilders probably don't train for that as much. They more just train hypertrophy. So in terms of explosiveness and maximal strength, they may not have developed those capacities in their training because they don't train super, super heavy potentially, or they don't train to be powerful. Their body's ability to produce force quickly is not as much as a gymnast. So that it takes a whole amount of skill as well. So, and skill's another thing. So I think definitely if a stronger muscle is a bigger muscle, but power to weight ratio is going to be important as well. I think if you took a gymnast and they sort of switched to weightlifting, they've probably got fairly good, I guess, body type for weightlifting, but their joint structure and limb lengths and things may not be appropriate. But they're quite powerful, I would say, and they have good power to weight ratio and strength to weight ratio. But in terms of bodybuilders, they just probably haven't maximized their force output and may not have the skill of a gymnast, or might just be bigger in general. So even though you'd be surprised how much a bodybuilder can probably lift compared to a gymnast, and if the bodybuilder is bigger than a gymnast, I'd probably say if they've maximized their strength, they would be able to lift more, but it does come down to the training they've potentially done. And it is hard to compare sometimes. I think it's a good analogy in general, and it, like, for yourself or for a person or a client, if they get bigger, they will be getting stronger. So it's a good way to see. So if a client, whether it's a squat or a bench press, if they can squat 10 more kilos or they can bench press 5 more kilos, it's probably a good sign that they've put on some muscle mass. Again, the first sort of 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, there's a lot of neuromuscular adaptations going on, so their ability to coordinate the movement, their ability to activate the motor units is going to play a big role in them getting stronger. But for an intermediate lifter or someone's been lifting for 6 months and then they're progressing and they put 5 kilos on their squat, there's a good chance that strength increase is due to increases in muscle mass. So that's probably the best way to sort of utilize that analogy, I think. It's very hard when we compare sports, especially because skill comes into it a lot. But that's same with weightlifting or powerlifting. While strength is a massive component of powerlifting and bench pressing, for example, there's some element of skill there. And with sort of, weightlifting, for example, if someone's doing a a clean and jerk, even there might be a stronger athlete out there, but the athlete with better technique is potentially going to be able to lift more. Even though they might be slightly smaller, their lift is going to be better because they've got a better technique. So very hard to sort of, I guess, be super strict on that rule from person to person, just because of these coordination and training differences. But interperson, I think it's a really good, useful way to, I guess, check if muscle mass is going on. If their strength is going up, their muscle mass is going up. There's no way someone, after sort of that 6 months of good training, if they're putting on strength, if they're able to lift more weight and apply more force, they're going to have to have built new muscle tissue. And that's, I think, the best way to sort of look at that, and that can sort of help. Hopefully that gives you a bit of a overview, everyone, of periodization and some different theories on it, how it's applied, how it can work. But I think it's a really interesting thing to look at with your programming rather than writing sessions. Well, what's this session going to look like next week, the week after? Write 4 sessions in a row and go, how am I going to change these sessions? So it's a block, and then write the next block. What am I going to do? Where's the deload going to go? Have a go at it, because there's lots of interesting stuff you can do. If you think of any questions, anybody or Annabelle, off the back of my chat on this podcast, send an email to tom@afa.com.au. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Ask any questions. I can do follow-up podcasts. I'll send you an email back. It's a really, really interesting topic, and I think you could discuss it for hours because there's so many different ways to apply it. We've talked a lot about strength and hypertrophy and resistance training, but you can apply periodization to cardiovascular or aerobic activity as well. And you've sort of got to, when you're applying it to both, then you've sort of got to look at, you might be doing block periodization, but you've almost got daily undulating going on between resistance training and cardiovascular training. How do you manage those workloads together when you're looking at athletes and you're trying to work both different components? Lots of different factors go into it, and that's why you do need periodization. So you can say, okay, I'm going to focus on this, whether, let's say the squat. It was a great example to start with. If I want to focus on my back squat for a block of training, I know that I'm probably going to have to reduce the volume of bench pressing or deadlifting I'm doing. So that's going to sort of stick to maintenance or maybe deload that. And a squat is going to take more of my effort, more of my training volume, and I'm going to sort of more focus on the squat. And in order to be able to recover from that high volume of squatting, I know I'm going to need to reduce my training somewhere else. And that might come at the expense of, say, a bench press or a deadlift, and deload that. But periodization allows you to sort of consider that and maximize your potential in certain fitness components or skills or lifts at certain time points, or just as certain focus. And it might be getting stronger, it might be getting bigger, building muscle in certain areas of focus, that sort of thing. Lots of different ideas around periodization. So yeah, if anyone has any questions or thoughts on it after listening to the podcast, send an email. Definitely happy to keep the discussion going. If you are interested or want to look into our advanced periodization course, send an email to info@afa.com.au and they'll be able to help you out for sure. Other than that, guys, I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you all soon.